Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to our third diocese webinar. Tonight's topic is Godly Parenting, question and answer style webinar with our two speakers tonight, His Grace Bishop John, whom you all know, and Dr. Ioana Papa from St. Mary's in Cambridge, who's the co-founder of the Team for Soul. She's a psychiatrist and certified life and organizational leadership coach. And we're very glad to have you all tonight with us. We've received about 8 or 9 questions that were submitted early, so we're going to start tonight with those. But there's a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen where you can, if you have questions throughout the webinar tonight, you can post those in the Q&A box, and we'll get to those after we do the ones that were submitted earlier. So now we'll ask Father Joseph Kimmett to lead us in our opening prayer.
Thank you, Khalil, and welcome to everyone. We're delighted to have you. Glory to the Father, to the Son, and the Holy Spirit, both now and ever, and to ages of ages. Amen. O heavenly King, O Comforter, the Spirit of truth, who art in all places and fillest all things, come and abide in us and cleanse us from every stain and save our souls, O good one. Glory to the Father, to the Son, and the Holy Spirit, now and ever, and to ages of ages. Amen. Sadna, it's all yours.
Thank you. And thanks to everyone who has given themselves to us this evening for this effort. My goal for this evening is to empower parents to step up to the plate and for us all to do our jobs, interacting with our children with the respect that the children are due, and to guide them through a world that's never been more complicated. The world is so very different from the world that we knew 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And technology and change are so rampant that it's difficult to keep up with everything. But children are still children, and they need the guidance of their parents to make sense of the world. We can't rely on the world to introduce our children to Jesus Christ. And just as we give our children our genes and our homes and ourselves, we need to give them the Christian heritage and tradition that God himself delivered to the apostles and the apostles delivered to us. So we really need to not be shy about introducing our children to Jesus Christ. I mentioned respect. You know, in earlier times, and by earlier times, I mean throughout almost all of the centuries coming up to modern times, children were not very much valued by society. And Christ and the church very much taught a counter message to the world that Christ entered into and the church finds itself in. And in our iconography, we see many iconographers painting children as if they're little adults. And the message is that children are human beings and deserve a level of respect. And our children are not just ours, they're God's children. They're his creation. And Christ is recorded in the scriptures as saying, allow the children to come to me because they are not only of great value, but they're examples to the adults that we need an honesty, a vulnerability, a childlikeness in order to understand God. And so our children can very much help us and teach us. But our kids are getting all kinds of crazy messages, and we need to take courage from the church and from each other to respond to these questions and strange teachings of the world directly and one at a time. We're very much blessed to have Dr. Ioana Papa with us, who can bring to us experience not just as a psychiatrist and a teacher, but a parent. And so she can also offer very, very practical responses. So that's my goal for tonight. Ioana, what are your goals for tonight?
Thank you, Sayana, for the introduction. Yeah, so I think you pointed out very clearly, my approach is very practical. So I'm hoping by the end, there will be some practical, really tangible things to hold on in your heart and your mind. And we will cover as we go through different questions. I want to just share quickly what are some of my nuggets and perspectives that I bring. I bring on one hand a developmental point of view in terms of how to think in scaffolding in raising children, not just in terms of discipline, but in general, how to come alongside our kids and teaching them skills and teaching them about Christ. In the same time, there's this sense of freedom and responsibility that I'll touch at some point, I'm sure, through the questions. In terms of dealing with conflict, the core for me is how to help parents, how to help myself to stay centered and curious and grounded in the wisdom of Christ, the eye of the storm, so to speak. How to think through cultural trends and how to help teach and equip our kids to discern different assumptions that we take for granted, and how to balance that, teaching discernment. I believe it's very important. How to think through staying always in connection with our kids, even when things are going great, but also when there might be conflict at home. There's a sense of connection and love, and how to really nurture a sense of intimacy in our relationship, in our connections with Christ. And there's a progression as we go along in our relationship. And we as parents have a unique ability and awesome responsibility to model that with our kids. And in the last couple of points, this has to do with identity. I think the identity, it's a big topic on the table right now, culturally, on multiple levels. And so how to think through identity and how to help kids think through their own identity and the process they're going through. And underneath all that, what are the kids' developmental needs? Fundamentally, they need to be seen, loved, respected, accepted, and in the same time have firm boundaries and a sense of belonging, right? So where are they getting those needs? That's the kind of underlining question for tonight. Where are they getting those needs met, right? If it's not in our family, they need them, so they'll look in other places. So just kind of that's the background, and I'm all for quick tips if we can, as a situation comes up. So I'm really excited for today. So all the questions that you might bring.
Great, thank you. What's our first question?
Sorry. Okay, our first question is, what is guidance from the church on having a saint's name as a first or middle name versus having it as an additional name?
That's a fun question. Often customs are different in different places within the church. So this isn't something that's doctrinal or something like that. This is kind of local customs that are really very, very helpful. When we name a child, we either offer a name that we think fits the child, the baby's personality already as it's expressed, or more often our dreams or hopes for the child. So if we want the child to hold Christ in himself, we might name him Christopher, the Christ bearer, or Abdullah, the servant of God, or Christodoulos, the servant of Christ. So we have that opportunity. Sometimes we name children to have a kind of patron, either with someone living or departed, that we want them to emulate. So we may name a child after someone that we would like them to grow up to be like. And very often that's a saint that we want to have our child to grow up having a mentoring role with. So any or all of the above, all of those things work. First name, middle name, baptismal name. Baptismal name is the name that we give the child to receive communion with, and sort of a church name. It can be their first or middle name. In some of our traditions, like in the Serbian tradition, the family name is the name of a saint, is given to the patronage of a saint. The whole family is given to the patronage of a saint who they have a family devotion to, or a slava, and they celebrate in a big way the feast of the family. So all of those things are all wonderful and helpful traditions to help our kids connect with others.
Thank you. The next question is, what practical advice can you give for older teenage children?
Joanna?
It's a great question, and it's also obviously very, it can encompass a lot of aspects to this. I would say for teenage children, the task at hand is really for them to form their identity. So having some understanding that this is an important developmental phase, and the sense of belonging to peers, it's really crucial. And so to realize that is a need in this season, and to really use discernment, how to associate with peers, which peers to look, which media to look online, because the cement, so to speak, internally is not yet firm. So it will have an impact. What we associate with, it's really impacting ourselves. So on the one hand, that's one advice that I can resonate with. And I had conversations with my kids who are teenagers about this idea of trust in relationships. That is both ways. My kids needed to trust me. If I say I'm going to do this or drive them to different places, that I'm going to show up. And that kind of reciprocity in a relationship is needed, that I needed also to trust them, and really have that as a focus. And the sense of, freedom, it's such a big thing on our culture nowadays. but freedom comes also with responsibility. So yes, if someone if as a child, you have, you might be a 14-year-old and you really have the maturity in terms of holding your responsibilities and your trust in the relationship. Like a 16-year-old, it doesn't matter the age, right? That could come with more freedom, versus if someone could be in a 60-year-old, but really the sense of commitments and fulfilling responsibilities is a much younger age, right? That the level of freedom could vary as well. So really link them together and have really explicit conversations with the kids. I found that very helpful. And one very cool advice that, it seems kind of obvious, but in my, when I was younger and I had my very more egocentric kind of thinking, it was helpful to hear being pointed out that, oh, God doesn't work just through me and my thoughts and my ideas, that God actually reveals through other people. And that really opened me up to curiosity, to ask people's advice and engage them into the conversation, that it's a much more collaborative, and really look at our family, the nucleus of family, as a resource that way. So that's the kind of a nutshell for now. I'm curious, Sayena, if you have other things.
Yeah, for me, when I think about teens, I'm always reminded that very soon they'll be driving, maybe living at school, and so the emphasis for me is helping the kids make good choices. And so rather than telling them what to do, exploring with them options and challenging them to make some choices, and trying to give them the tools that they need to be whole human beings. I don't want to micromanage my kids and their spouses and their families. Um, uh, they don't want it, and we parents really should be making an effort to become obsolete, so that our children can be productive parents themselves and good citizens. And so I think it's important for us to help them develop the internal abilities to do all of those things.
Mm-hmm. And if I could piggyback on that, absolutely. Parenting, there are different styles of parenting, but bottom line is, kids, when they turn 18 or they go to college, nothing magic happens and then all of a sudden they're filled with wisdom and they know what to do. There's a transition, there's a scaffolding. It's almost like the clock, going from 3 all the way to 4 o'clock. You see this shorter hand of the clock moving slowly, and having that scaffolding with the kids. And as Sayena, you were saying, teaching them how to make choices, engaging those conversations can be quite helpful. And yeah, absolutely.
John Bojamer used to say that too often we treat adults like children and children like adults. We ask the adults we'd like to tell the adults what to do, and the children, we say, figure out yourself how to fast and what rules to follow and what you want to do. And that's just backwards. So we need always to be treating adults like adults and children like children. And as the children become closer to adult age, we need to help them navigate and develop into adulthood.
Thank you. Next question comes from a parent who has teenage boys and asks, how do you reconcile the Bible's creation story with the scientific explanation? How do we explain it to teens, please?
The creation story, or Genesis, is a theological book. And its purpose is to explain to us who God is, how God creates deliberately, how God relates to us, and how we relate to each other. Who was it that was taking notes as God created the world? You see, before he created mankind, how do we know what he did? Now God reveals himself through his community and to his community, and and these divinely inspired writers didn't take dictation, but uh, but used allegory and stories to explain the theology of what life is about. The Bible is more about who God is and what he did than how God does things. And so I don't think it's meant to be a manual or a history book or a science book. Joanna, you're a scientist.
Right. So as a scientist, I was so curious. Even when I was young, I think I got first, I stopped in my tracks in my 7th grade learning about the body. Like you learn about the heart, and then the lungs does this for the entire body, and then the brain does this. But there was never an answer, like, why is this happening? And I asked my teacher, and she was like, she had no idea what I was, either I haven't explained it well or she didn't understand it. But there was this sense of, with science, there's never a answer of why. It's always the question is about how. So you get a lot of hows, and fundamentally in science, we're dealing with facts. The facts are simple and kind of obvious to everyone, right? If I drop an apple to the ground, it's going to just fall. That's a fact. Now, the theory and how did this all work, those are scientists who are filling in the blanks. So, for example, for the creation story, there's lots of facts. I mean, people study geology and cosmology, and there's ways to really look at how many millions the Earth existed and of years and the cosmos and whatnot. So those are things that, as Bishop John said, right, there was no one tracking what God did. We're kind of going backwards. You know, we're looking at the reality and we kind of record it that way. So that's, in a sense, is not an issue, because, and obviously scientific theories, they get revised because, as I said, there are lots of facts and then there's lots of holes. And this is where the theories come in. A theory is not a fact. The theory is trying to fill in all those holes. So, you know, we take that as a grain of salt. And, you know, scientists believe that the Earth was flat until they discovered it wasn't. And there's going to be many, many more revelations coming along from the science point of view, because God is so mysterious and that we cannot even, you know, scratch the surface. The more answers we get, the more questions they're going to arrive, but we'll never answer the question why. So I would say never, in a sense, from my end, I don't look at science as answering why, even if some scientists do, because every scientist has a mindset, has a lens through which they see the world. They believe it or not, they're aware of it or not, but everyone has a science. And just a quick thing before we move on, when I was starting teaching AP psychology, I bought about 11 books at least of psychology, and I was trying to read the same chapter and kind of see, okay, how are different authors they're dealing with it. It was amazing, the same facts, and the story was so different. It was unbelievable. So yes, I think it kind of captures this.
One of my favorite components of science, or principles of science, is the desire to be open-minded and to leave room for what we don't yet know. And so for that, I think scientists could do a better job when they look at religion, and we could do a better job even when we look at religion. And being open-minded and being patient, recognizing what we don't know.
Mhm. Right. A good scientist has critical thinking and is humble. Right. I think that those are the cornerstone of making a good scientist. Absolutely. Which makes also a good Christian. So here we go.
Hey, thank you. The next question is, how does social media and electronics usage impact the way we approach Orthodox Christianity upbringing, both positively or negatively?
Should I start? So there's good news and bad news. The good news is the world is evolving with social media and electronics. And I was one of those people that didn't want to get too immersed in it until COVID. And I think that happens to most of us. Now we cannot survive in a sense, in many people, in terms of even connection with our families and whatnot. So there's many blessings that come with it, right? This idea, even having this webinar, right? And not having be able to reach so many people, seeing our family members on FaceTime. You know, my mother, she's 82. I can see her on FaceTime and we connect almost daily. It's wonderful. There's ways to communicate through email and even social media, you know, Facebook, and get so many updates from people that I haven't seen or talked in 20, 30 years. The downsides of it, developmentally, when we are consuming not just social media, but also TV and all the shows, we're actually very passive. There's something on our brain, the brain is very passive, kind of consuming whatever it's happening. And nowadays, online, there's great science in a way about how to capture our attention. You know, they're actually very good at doing that. We recognize it or not. So children developmentally, I mean, let me back this off. It's hard for adults to be bombarded with so much information and kind of see me. You can imagine developmentally for younger children, it's very complicated and they can become addicted very quickly. So because the frontal lobe, you know, that part of our brain that is really has to do with patience and delaying gratification, you know, waiting, that actually is not developed. And to pause just quickly, they did a study with Marshmallow. If you haven't seen those, you might want to go on a YouTube, the Marshmallow Experiment. They take 4 or 5-year-olds and they give them one marshmallow and they say, if you wait for 2 minutes, you'll get 2, right? So they're trying to see, are they trained to wait a little bit or just satisfied right away, their impulses. And they did studies in the long run, and the kids were actually able to wait for 2 minutes. That's a long time for a 5-year-old. You know, you see them fidgeting and moving. They're very cute. You should definitely watch those. Then they actually did much better in life, right? So this is an important for younger kids, how to help them to delay gratification, how to help them to wait patiently. And online and internet and electronics does not teach that to the kids. It's great, obviously, for school and for information, but it has to be somehow put in balance, and really explain that to the kids as well. I would not just make it like Bishop John, you were talking earlier about how to engage the kids and have conversation. I think that's very important to have those conversations. And I had those with my kids as well. And eventually they got it. And now they're after a while, they're like, oh yeah, I could see how addicted I am to this. I need to put it down. I need to turn it off, you know, as opposed to me and I actually did that. I nagged them for quite a while until I figured out, okay, that's not working. So trying to find other ways, but really engage them in those conversations. But when they're young, limit as much as possible. And watch the content, because not everything that looks safe online and through social media, there've been lots of studies with, Yeah, with kids getting all sorts of messages. Think about belonging. One little comment from someone on Facebook can really bring their mood down. Anyway, I think I could go on and on, but I'll just wrap it up here.
Sure.
Sayana?
I think it's noteworthy how many people are discovering Orthodoxy and learning more about their faith through the social media outlets, and now, with the live streaming, it's as difficult as it is. Everybody gets a front row seat, and people are reporting that they're hearing prayers that they didn't hear before, and seeing things that they hadn't seen before, and that is enhancing their experience of the church. I think that we can supplement in these difficult times of lockdowns and social distancing with telephone calls to each other and making an effort to call each other and to stay in touch.
The next question that comes in is, how to handle children with disrespectful attitudes?
Right. And Khalil, would that be okay? I see a note here from Father Joseph about a follow-up question. Do we have time for a quick follow-up, the question about the Genesis or not?
Sure, go ahead,
Okay.
Joanna.
The question was about Darwinism, and there's holes. This is for someone who's actually a PhD scientist as well. And I just want to affirm your comment that, yes, there are many holes. And this is where the distinction between facts and we're going back to the theory of evolution. There's the distinction between the facts and the actual theory, because the theory brings the story and whatever that person, if they have a faith or not faith, that would be colored. So I think we see that in the Darwinian theory, that there are holes because it's a theory versus what are the facts. So having those conversations with the kids, it's helpful. And I hope that answers that question.
Khalil, concerning the question on respect, as much as we can, and I know that what I'm going to say is extremely difficult because parents are stretched in ways that previous generations didn't have. The world is a very different place. In earlier times, there were more extended family members around, and neighbors watched each other's kids, and parenting was just a lot easier. In my neighborhood, the rule for most of the kids is we were to check in with our parents when the street lamps came on. And until the street lights came on, we unless called out otherwise, we were kind of free to be anywhere in the neighborhood. So it certainly is a much more difficult time. But as much as we can, if we can show our kids respect and model that respect with our children, I think that that's helpful. I like to get on the level of the child so that I talk to children eyeball to eyeball and explain to them why we do things the way that we do. And sometimes it's even enough to say, God has given me this responsibility over you. And it's fair because God's going to give you responsibility over your children. So you'll get a turn to be the boss. But we do it this way because this is what I need in order for me to feel that you're safe. And I need to be responsible to God as his representative here to tell you what God wants and what God says is right and what God says is appropriate. Our reason for being a family is for all of our salvation, my salvation and for your salvation. And so let's try to be like Christ showed us how to be, and be loving and merciful, but also wise and cautious, emphasizing citizenship, the needs of others, that's real love, and self-control, which is also love. That we're not the center of the universe, God's the center of the universe. And we need to be talking to God and responding to him.
Yes, if I can, yeah, were you done, Bishop John?
I was, but then I thought of something else.
Go ahead.
Because respect, I think, is essential. If we don't teach our children to respect us and to respect each other and to respect themselves, they're not going to be successful in adult relationships. And so we need to model that with each other. Parents need to be respectful to each other, even when they disagree. And that's a real big priority. I remember one time being told to shut up, and so I chose to do that. And when my son needed a ride someplace, I was still in silence because I was told to shut up. And so I wasn't going to take him anywhere because he said shut up. And happened only once, and made a lasting point. Joanna?
Yes, and I agree. The respect is the cornerstone, and there's something that I'm experienced myself, and also I've noticed with other parents. Many times we don't make things explicit, or we do it in the middle of a conflict. So as a rule of thumb, going back to what you were saying, Bishop John, we need to model the respect. If there is conflict and we feel angry, responding from anger is not the better choice here. And many times what I would suggest is if it's harder to collect our thoughts in the midst of a storm, so to speak, when we're confronted somehow, to really make it explicit that we will, to have the habit as a family to take a pause when those things happen and come back when everyone is calm, because then the conversation are going to go much better. We are the holder, so to speak, from a scientific point of view of the frontal lobe. We are the frontal lobe in the room. We need to borrow that with our kids, so to speak. So having presence, having calmness, and having access to all our wisdom is very important in those if there's a difficult situation. If we are upset, our emotions are well known to take us offline in ways, and then we kind of react in more impulsive ways. So modeling that respect towards our kids that Bishop John was talking earlier, it starts with us. How do we hold our cool? Do we need help? Sometimes we might need to process things with someone else before we can calm down. But having the habit of talking and make it explicit in a family, talking about difficult situations outside of conflict. And I'm amazed how many times I responded, when my kids were younger, and how many parents do that. The parenting doesn't come with a manual. We kind of learn along the way, and we have the community to also help us. But that respect is crucial, and staying in that eye of the storm. And this, when there's another quality to this eye of the storm, so to speak, which is curiosity. Many times we respond face value. We assume, we actually project our own stories about why the child is saying or doing the thing that they're saying. If we can stay curious and ask, when there's disrespect, usually that means there's probably underneath some anger or frustration for the child. And if we have the space to actually get curious, anger doesn't travel alone. Anger and anxiety never travel alone as feelings. There's usually another feeling underneath it, and underneath that there's an unmet need. What is that need? What happened? Who said what? So just getting curious about what is that core need that the child doesn't feel it's fulfilled. There is a really helpful, very helpful book that I want to suggest that helped me tremendously. It's called How to Talk So Kids Will Listen, and How to Listen So Kids Will Talk. And they also, they're two women, I think they were two colleagues, and they also wrote a book about siblings without rivalry. And it was wonderful. And I could say even now, my two daughters are just so close, you know, but there are some very concrete examples and step-by-step how to listen, how to stay curious, and how to get to the bottom of a conversation while staying centered. I know that's not exactly a quick tip. It's more of a work behind the scenes, so to speak, but it does, once we're settled, you know, that I'm reminded of that verse from the Bible. When you're put on a situation, the Holy Spirit will come and will speak to you. If we're calm and centered and we really listen to God inside, something will pop up that we're not even thinking of. And it's going to be a much better solution than any, you know, step 1, step 2, step 3 that we learn from a book or from psychology today.
Okay, the next question. How do we navigate dialogue around selecting gender, changing gender, experimenting with sexuality when socially this is all now okay?
I think that children are much more interested in what their parents think than parents think that they are. And I think that they're more influenced by parents than by anybody else, extended family, schools, society, and even peers. Although I do appreciate the amount of peer influence, especially when our kids want those things. There is right now in our society a lot of fluidity of understanding about things like gender. And I think that it's making young people more anxious and confused, feeling the need to understand every impulse and every feeling. I would discourage children from making any decisions until their brains are more fully developed, around age 30. Because once you start doing surgeries and changing people's bodies and dressing them up and in clothes of the opposite gender or different genders, day after day, you just add to all of that confusion. I would say stay very close to identifying exactly what the child is asking and just answering that question. We don't need to answer more than what the child is ready to receive or what the child is really asking. So ask the child to be very specific and explain what they want to know, and then just be as honest and direct as you can. And if there's something confusing or that we don't understand, let's just say that's really confusing or complex and we don't really understand it.
I would add absolutely. And you know, as a physician and scientist, I know the topic is very complex. I mean, there's so many layers here from the genes, you know, there are, you know, that variations at some level in terms of the genes and the manifestations. Then there's also issues of, it boils down to issues of identity, right? Who am I? That's really at the core. And with that, I would say there's a big pressure nowadays culturally for kids to define that identity too early as a way to belong that's usually they're trying to fit in. There's a lot of pressure now to go one way or the other. And I would say from, I like what you said, Bishop John, about kids do not have to interpret every feeling, every body sensation they have and link that to their identity. It's premature, it's too early. There's a season in that this takes place. And as I said, the pressure, cultural pressure is so high. So talking with them about the issues of identity and also the peer pressure that is, what's feeding and going, what's the actual need, and staying curious with that. But I would say the issues are usually about gender for kids is about belonging. Also identity, understanding their own feelings and their own body sensations. I think that's a key. So having honest conversations with kids about that, knowing that this is a season, that we do not want to make permanent solutions for temporary things. 5 years from now, they might think differently. I mean, that goes also about tattoos and body piercing. There's a lot of pressure in general for doing things to the body, that if there's a wait, I know that it goes back to them. Can they wait? Can they trust the process a little longer, knowing that they will change? And there's one more layer that I found that has to do, probably there's so many layers, but one that comes to mind that has to do with roles, with this pressure to identify themselves, find their identity, right? This pressure from the culture, female or male or trans or whatever. There are the idea of what is my role. So if I have a tendency, there's also a reaction, I would say, in the culture from all the cultural roles that were imposed. So let's say if I don't like, what can go in a child's mind? If I don't like to, I'm a girl and I don't like to cook and I don't like to play with dolls and whatnot, or as a boy, I don't like cars and whatnot, and I'm more sensitive or more interested in dolls, for example, that comes up often for younger children. Then there's there could be a fear and a pushback. Kids can be laughed at school if they're out of their particular role or the way boys and girls have to behave. So there's a lot of social pressure on that. And in the same time, the conversation can be, it's okay. I personally, as a woman, I don't like cooking, and I like more to read, and I like to be more in leadership positions. Does that make me a man? It doesn't, right? So disidentifying from roles to the identity. So it's a lot of clearing up the air, so to speak. The identity takes some time. Let's see, what is this all about? Is this about some body, some impulses, some peer pressure? Is this about identity, about roles? And just kind of discern that. And as Bishop John was saying, have conversations, keep it open, keep the bond and the connection open, so they will come for advice and suggestions, as opposed to us kind of saying, oh, you have to do it this way. Of course, there's a bottom line, right? There's a bottom line at which point, who's paying the medical bills for any of those changes, right? Who's right? We have to, there's a practical level to this. And as parents, we are ultimately in charge and responsible. So it's okay to use our discernment. I hope that answered the question.
The next one is, how should I approach raising my children in the faith, disciplining them, etc., with a husband who is agnostic?
Well, of course, it's always preferable for us to be on the same page before we marry about these kinds of questions, but I recognize that people change their mind, and that and that sometimes people fall in love and without having made deals about these kinds of things. But as much as possible, I think the parents need to hear each other's concerns and then work together to set some standards for the whole family that everybody can support. So even if you don't want to go to church, or you don't believe in church, what will you do? And maybe if the best you can do is not talk about it, and let me offer our children the faith and the Christian heritage that we have to offer them and to give them, then, if we want to give them this temporal life, we want to give our kids eternal life, and that requires a real relationship with God. So for the parents to get together as much as they can, and if the parents disagree, then maybe it's okay certainly it's okay to say that, to be honest and say, okay, we disagree, but this is my faith, and I'd like you to know it because it's important to me for you to at least know what I believe, and then later you can make your own choices, but at least you'll have this information. So I would say work with each other about each other's ideals without compromising what's most important to you, and being, again, explicit about sharing. About discipline, it has to be measured, it has to be appropriate, it has to be fitting the situation. But you can't just discipline. You have to make sure that children know the rules before we impose consequences. And so to have those, the rules and the consequences clearly understood right up front. I know some parents tell their children, your punishment is going to hurt me more than it hurts you. That's not something I ever said to my kids. It's just a consequence, and if you touch the hot stove, you'll burn your hand. It's a consequence. And if you're late bringing home the car, you're going to lose 20 minutes for every 5 minutes that you're late for your use of the car next time. And just let it be reasonable, let it be upfront, and be passionless about it. It's not about you being mean. It's just about recognizing that in the real world, to be good citizens, we have to be aware of consequences. Ioana?
Yeah, absolutely. And what came to mind was this idea of moving from the debate mode to more of a teaching, mentoring mode as parents, because in our debate is so prevalent nowadays in our culture, and kids love a good debate. Some of them, many of them, there's a sense of, yes, we can have conversations and whatnot, but as parents, we're really more into more of a mentoring role, parenting and mentoring role. So yeah, teaching about consequences that if they don't follow those. So I that for me kind of captured what you just said, Bishop John, about the discipline. And I can share from my personal experience from my first marriage, I didn't have that discernment early on in terms of choosing and having those conversations earlier. So I ended up in a situation where for me, faith was very important, and I became much stronger also toward, within a couple of years of our marriage, and was not for my ex-husband now. So raising kids, actually, we could not come to any agreement about our faith. So that was just a dead end in that way. So what I chose to do is to just be a witness of Christ in what I did, and not engage in debates and whatnot, but stay with the kids and explaining. And that was, for me, witnessing. One of the things that I love about Orthodox Christian faith is emphasizes also this idea of witnessing through our actions. I think that's just such a strong component to it, and be a role model that way. So that was it, and that kept me grounded in my faith. And my kids saw this, and they have a lot of respect. They might not agree on several things, but as they discovered years later, they're past college now, they're adults, they keep talking to themselves. That's one of our inner jokes, that, oh, now I really am doing now what mom is doing. They just realize that, some of the advices and suggestions that I did, they were really helpful. So it's unfolding, that trust, it's unfolding. And I do have one message in general. I'm not sure if it's connected with the disrespectful attitude or not. I mean, it could be relevant, but one of the conversations, and I think this is more relevant for teenagers, once they reach 16, 17, 18, there's something developmental. They mature much more to have those kind of conversations, like Bishop John, you're saying, those are the consequences, and ask them, what would you choose? Like, invite them, right, to develop that discernment, and have quick follow-ups, like have conversations like this once a week. This should not happen only if there's an issue that comes up, but do have on a regular basis one-to-one conversation with each of your child. How are you doing? How's it going? What are your plans? What choices are you making? Did it work? Did it not work? If it didn't, what have you learned? So they get into a role. This is a process of they start to learn to do that. Otherwise, they're not learning that. We don't have that kind of class in school. So with that, as they make the decisions, I was saying, and I'm suggested to many other parents, to say something like, okay, this is your decision, but this is what I would advise. This is, again, for older kids when it's appropriate, of course. This is my recommendation, but now I trust you that you're going to make the best decision. So that ending, it just developed even further their trust, that, oh, my mom is trusting me. And when they made a mistake and the decision was bad, I wasn't about to say, oh, I told you so. I stayed away from that. And in time, what happens, it's not a quick solution, but there's very impactful. After a while, they would actually come for advice. They would come with, whenever there's any issues, I'm the first person to call. So that, because I don't give them right now particular suggestion, but there's a process of helping them think about it, like Bishop John, you're saying, and we can really model that, and we can start that process for smaller things much earlier, if that makes any sense. But a quick advice is develop that weekly bond and conversations or activity, not just having a conversation around dinner table, which are wonderful, or when we need something, but just, like we call a friend and we talk with our friends once in a while. Let's do that. That develops intimacy and connection outside of urgency of our day-to-day needs. There's an interest there. So I hope that brings the larger perspective, and also just a quick tip to really implement that and have those one-to-one conversation. And yes, if you have 3, 4, 5, 6 kids or more, it can get quite timely. It's going to be quite a long process to go through this every week, but even if it's for 5-10 minutes, I think that can plant some really great seeds.
Thank you. The next question is, are there any resources specifically designed for the instruction and ongoing cultivation of the virtues in children?
Uh, I like Father Tom Hocko's maxims, 55 maxims, which you can hear on website of Ancient Faith Radio. And I think it very much speaks to our times. And I think that's a really good place to start.
And I don't have a particular book or suggestion, but one way to think about is to tap into and Google for some books with about heroes, about beautiful archetypes, you know, and there's many children's story, and not just for children, but also for adults. They could really inspire kids to do well. Yeah. And I would say, obviously, read them first and see if you like the content, but going through and obviously the life of the saints, there are, if they're really into that, but if they're not, you know, using some great stories. I think, what is that, the Aesop fables? I haven't looked through them in decades, so I'm not quite sure. Yeah, but kind of like in that in that direction.
We've had a few questions come in during the course of the webinar. This first one actually sort of is a combination of what you've answered in the last couple of minutes. The question is, I grew up going to church every week and being told that church and God are the most important things. However, I do not remember my family talking about faith in God at home, or praying or reading scripture. What are some ideas for bringing God and church into the home with young children? This person's kids are going to soon turn 3 and 5. And she says she's not used to doing this.
I think she answered her own question. Make it, be deliberate about making those things a priority. Letting your children see you pray and praying with them and teaching them to pray. Reading even a couple of lines of scripture and asking the child what that says to them, and trying to help the child understand a context, and getting to know how God surprises us, and how God is really acting in our lives.
Right. And I observed that, obviously, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, you know, decades ago, let's even 100 years ago, there were smaller communities. Everyone was going to church. We had a lot of support from the community and also from just being in church, right? To be at the liturgy. And with the rise of the internet, there's been a lot of breaking, and the travel as well. There's been a lot of breaking down of those external support and structures. So it's becoming imperative now, and especially now with COVID, right? The church services are not present, that we're considering the idea of developing our inner sanctuary. And that could be obviously from the home inside, but to aid in this, because as I mentioned earlier, with internet and whatnot and so many distractions, it's harder for younger children, right? It's very specific and very concrete. What are we doing at home? And in a sense, is more of a transition from us as parents, right? Because we're so used to going to church, we're so used to, if you are, and not having that as not having that available now, or a very limited basis, that is really hard. So it really requires us to change our habits. Can we create a corner in our home? And maybe you already have that, you know, with icons and some candles, and create that and make it a routine, as Bishop John, you're saying, in terms of reading and discussion, but bring some of that at home. There's possibility now to order incense, and have incense at home. I think this is it. Originally, many people were doing actually that. We kind of lost touch now with this, but it's why not starting again, right? And really consider worshiping at home on a daily basis. It does require some time from us, but I would say start small. It could be 5 minutes. It doesn't have to be big in terms of type commitment. And but make it a point to do it on a daily basis. Morning prayers, evening prayers. Yeah, it's an opportunity now, in a sense, to really strengthen this at home.
Little kids ask why a lot, Would it be legitimate to turn the tables and ask little kids why? Why do you think we have food? Why do you think God gives us talents? Why do you think God gives us bodies that we can use to get to know him better? Why do you think God gives us these talents and features and feelings? And how do you get to know God better using them? Can you ask a little kid those why questions?
Absolutely. Young children, older children, and also problem solve as a family. Hey, how can we do it now together? Do you have any ideas? And in tapping into their creativity and curiosity, I think that's fantastic. Yeah, we'll be surprised. And I think it's linked to something else that you said, Bishop John, earlier, to an earlier question, this idea of answer the question. If a child has a question, no matter what the age, to really find out about why are they asking, what's the scope really, what are they really asking. There's a funny story, and I cannot remember the punchline, but it went something like a very young child was asking when the babies are coming, and the parents it probably was a scientist, started a lot of explanations and whatnot. And the child really had something totally different in mind. If the parent would have only asked, which I cannot remember right now, but if the parent would have only asked, why are you asking? It was like something very, very small. Just kind of really bring that curiosity. It's a good practice. Absolutely.
I have a couple follow-up questions to what you were speaking about a few moments ago in regard to the home church, especially during this time of the pandemic and all. I'll combine the two questions if I can try. One says, how can we foster a sense of church community during this time? Our family's been live streaming Sunday liturgy at different points during the pandemic, and we desperately miss the sense of community. And there's another question saying, how do we keep our children spiritually engaged during this time? Because right now they don't seem to even have any interest in going to liturgy, even if they could.
Yeah, making people hungry is not an easy task. But I think we can help them bridge the gap by reminding them of people that they like in church and bringing those people into our prayers. By contacting them, by speaking of them, by asking the kids about their Sunday school teachers and those teachings, those kinds of things, and just to be very deliberate about that.
Yes, yeah, I agree. I was pondering on potential answers. I mean, on one hand, there is a sense of community. I mean, online, there are groups, they still meet, Teen Soyo or the teens group at church, or there's churches that organize, after church, so to speak, coffee hour when they connect. That is a potential solution. It does bring the issue of being too much on the screen now, with kids being online as well. It doesn't foster. So I like, Bishop John, your answer of bringing that sense of community in the home, having conversation about it, praying about it, maybe bringing some pictures or images or stories or yeah, it's not easy. It's very it's difficult. It is a challenge that we're having. But again, we can even ask the kids, you know, how do we do that? How do we foster that? Because out of sight, out of mind, right? It's kind of, we're really conditioned so easily. What's in front of us, that's where we really focus. And many times it's easy to get distracted and not remembering. So that could be a point also in terms of why do we remember all the saints during liturgy, right? I mean, other than that, without that, or having icons, it'd be so easy to forget about it. But constantly bringing that into their awareness. And I would say as much as possible, bringing the five senses at home, right? If I'm just at my dinner table and I put a computer and then this is church, it's not going to have the same impact. But if we're all worshiping together, you know, and bring some incense or candles or icons, collect them all, you know, this could be a family project. Like, how do we make this alive? And as parents, we don't have to have the answers. We can also ask the kids, and they might have much cooler ideas. Yeah, but it's a struggle. It's not easy. And I would say the parallel will be, well, if you don't see your friend for 5 years, remember that friend. How did you keep in touch? How do you, you know, tapping into their own experience? How do you make sure you're connected with your friends? Let's apply this to this situation.
Thank you. We've got a question from a parent who's asking how to handle a child at age 14 who is questioning faith. Is there a God? Who's rejecting the church? The parent feels crushed and feels like a failure. What should they do?
I think that we assume that children are more mature today than they have been in previous generations. That's a bad assumption. At the time of Christ, life was simple, and by age 12, you knew your father's trade, and you were, and you knew most of what you needed to know, and life was relatively more simple. So I think that at age 14, kids are sometimes still in a process of differentiating, and we often interpret this personally and rebellion and as rebellion. When a 2-year-old tells you no, the 2-year-old is trying to figure out where they ended begin and where you ended begin, and how you're separate from them. And 14-year-olds are doing the same thing. They're trying to figure out, what are my opinions and what are my parents' opinions, and how am I different from my parents? So I would suggest that we congratulate the kids for struggling with their faith, because honest struggling with the faith is a blessed thing. For us, Thomas is a really good guy. St. Thomas, you see, because his doubting and his work and his challenge brought him to profess my Lord and my God in a deeper way, perhaps, than some of the other apostles. And so I would encourage the struggle and congratulate the kid for it. I could say to a 14-year-old, you know, the tomb was empty and Jesus presented himself. But does it really make more sense to you that we're all accidents of just atoms that are spinning in the air that come together to make a human being? That humanity and the world are just coincidences or accidents? How often do you see a car that looks better after a crash? That's more aerodynamic and more valuable because the crash improved it. At least half of the crashes should improve the automobiles. But if everything is just by chance, you know. But I've not yet seen a car more drivable after a crash than before the crash. So I would welcome it. At the same time, I would encourage a 14-year-old to indulge me, to accompany me to church as a gift to me, because we can learn together and I can gain from his perspective, and it's something that we can do as a family, and that's what our family does. But I would begin by saying this questioning of God and questioning about God is a holy and wonderful and fantastic thing. And so let's go to church together and find out more. Let's buy into it even more and see what it can do and what it what it is for us. St. Thomas is a good guy in our church, and his doubting is good, because God made us reason endowed sheep, not dumb sheep who just follow the shepherd, but persons who need to say yes to God. And God can do what he wants, and he gives us free will for us to do what we want. And that reflects God. Luana?
Yes, this idea of welcoming the doubt and moving into that position of mentoring, walking with them, not being afraid. In general, if we parent out of fear, it's not working well, right? So we need to look into what is our fear around that. If there's no fear and we welcome it and we really walk with them, mentoring, they will figure it out for themselves. And I personally experienced this. I think this is one I was reflecting on. What was my question that brought me really close to God? Because I grew up in Romania under the communism, and although I was baptized, it was an atheist family that we grew up. You know, it's all scientific, and obviously was very dangerous to confess the faith. So I didn't know anything different. But what really stopped me in my tracks in my 20s, but I think that could stop in tracks 14-year-olds as well, or whatever age we are. This idea, okay, if God doesn't exist, that's so easy, right? I can make up my mind, I could do whatever. But if God does exist, whoa, all of a sudden I'm like, I could be in real trouble if I don't know him. Like, that was for me so simple. And I think, was it maybe Descartes could put what I think is a 16th century French, I want to say philosopher. He is Descartes' ledger, like really thinking logically. If he does not exist, it really doesn't matter what I believe. I go ahead and choose. But if God exists and I believe in him, boy, that makes my life so much easier. And if God does exist and I don't believe in him, I could be in trouble. And that really raised my curiosity. I was like, whoa, I actually don't know. What if God exists and I just don't know about it? So having that kind of curiosity, I approached my relationship with God differently. I was really curious. What if he does exist and I just don't know? And that, try it out and see what kind of conversation can come up out of that. And again, not of a sense of fear. I wasn't like someone was hitting me with a hammer around the head, but was this awareness that who am I? And what if there is an infinite God? That then what do I do then, right? Talk about, again, consequences and whatnot. So it was a very important wake-up call for me, which actually, out of that curiosity, God did reveal himself in ways that was just very personal to me, in a way that I knew without a doubt that he existed. But it started with me being even open to that conversation.
Thank you. We're going to go back and follow up on some of your comments from earlier. This is from a person recently divorced who has a 5-year-old child. Her ex agreed that at the time the child could be raised Orthodox, but now is very unsupportive, even to the point of trying to take Orthodoxy out of the child's life, even to the point where they don't say grace when the child's with the other parent. And then the child comes back to this parent very sad. I know there's a lot to unwrap here, but I just thought if you have a few more thoughts on this.
Should I go? It was sad for me too. It is very sad. And at the same time, there's not much we can do. I heard about this idea of the 3 buckets. You know, when they talk in AA about the things that we can change, God give me the wisdom to change the things that I can change, and the wisdom to know when things I cannot change. There's actually 3 buckets. There's a third one, the things that we can influence. You might not have control over what your ex is doing, but there's a way to influence, right, the child. And yes, the sadness and grief is real. And that needs probably support, finding a community that really helps, or someone that you can just walk along that grief journey. But ultimately, it's not over until it's over, right? So with love and patience and bringing your faith and explaining things, we never know. I'm sure I'm not the only one experiencing this, but sometimes we remember one thing that someone said to us in our lifetime, and that seed was there, and we kind of didn't pay attention to it. But, years later, all of a sudden, it became so meaningful. That's what we're doing, in a sense. We're planting those kind of seeds as parents. And curiously, psychology talks about this. They call it latent learning, that kids sometimes need, we can plant, we can teach them. And that's it's hopeful for parents. Don't think just because the kid is not answering right away or incorporating your teaching right away that it goes in vain. If it's really a very well planted seed, it will become, when it's becoming relevant for the child, it will come to the surface. So if it's planted with love, if it's planted with conviction, if it's planted in a good way, with faith, compassion, and especially, if we as parents try as much as we can to live our faith. Of course, we're imperfect, right? We cannot be perfect without Christ, but in our imperfections, we try our best to be authentic. And as we do that, kids will notice that, oh, there's something there, and it will spring to life.
I've met a few parents who use religion to kind of fight with each other, and the kids become the pawns. And to avoid that, I think we can say something to the child like, I'm really happy that you missed your prayer. I'm sure that if you just make the sign of the cross when you're at Dad's house, then, before you go to bed, or even if you make it without your hand, so that Dad doesn't get excited or get angry, that God will hear your prayer anyway. And that I'm proud of you, and I know that God is proud of you, and it's so exciting that you care.
We have one question left for our two panelists. This has been another incredibly successful webinar, and all of us in the diocese are so grateful that we have such talent and people willing to help each other. It's really a beautiful thing. And to all of you who have been with us tonight, we give you our gratitude and hope you'll come back and see us for more webinars in the future. A few minutes ago, Khalil sent out a chat to everyone with links to our YouTube site and the diocesan website, where you can go back and watch this recording or either of our two previous webinars. So our last question, how would you suggest we teach our kids to simply explain to their friends what Orthodoxy is and how it is different from other Christian faiths?
Okay. I would suggest 4 things. Number 1, God made us good like him. God is good, and he makes us good. To be human is to be like Christ, and God is good, so to be human is good. That's number 1. Number 2, God is close to us. Not far away. He's not looking to be appeased, that he baptized us into himself, and that he is right here, right now. 3, God wants us to share ourselves with him forever. That's what the church is. It's a celebration already in the kingdom of heaven, that the tomb is empty and that we're united. And number 4, that we are with him or in him, with everybody else who ever lived and whoever will live that says yes to God. The kingdom of heaven is at hand, and we're all together. The reason we have icons is because the saints and the icons are members of our parish, and they're close to us. Rana?
Yeah, that's a wonderful answer. And if I'm hearing you correctly, Father Joseph, the question has also in engaging also kids of other faith. Is that right? How to differentiate that? Is that?
Differentiate and explain, right?
And explain, right. Very good. Yeah, so the only thing that I would add, and I'm curious, Bishop John, what do you think about this, that the idea that Christianity, Christian Orthodox, is not so much about, I mean, so many denominations now, Christian denominations, is not so much about a religion in itself. It's more about a way of living. That's the foundation of this. And really the role model is Christ. That is something different. I mean, I've had to have so many conversations in general because of my profession. But as I looked at the different religions, there's no one that has the foundation of a miracle like this. I mean, I think the things that are really stunning about Christianity is that Christ was not just a wise teacher. There is a revelation that happened through his death and resurrection, and that we don't see that in anywhere else. And the fact that Christianity has evolved after so much, I mean, it has persisted in spite of all the persecutions, in spite of all odds, that in itself is pretty remarkable. And the message is really about self-sacrificing. I mean, ultimately, right, there's a message. There's something very unique about the Christianity and the message of it that can make people ponder, right? Of course, if we go into debate, my truth versus your truth, that's in conversations with peers, that's not gonna go anywhere necessarily. But having the peers also asking questions of the peers, right? There's something different here. What is it? And kind of get them to be curious about it. Because this story, is very different, yeah. narrative, and how we don't hear in other, I mean, there's some persecutions in other religions as well, but there's a whole approach that's different, right? The self-sacrifice, the strength of the faith, and this idea of the way of living. I don't know what you think about that, Bishop John, but
I'm there. Father Joseph, Khalil, Father Ed, Joanna, thank you very much for tonight. And I'm very grateful to all of you and to everybody who participated with their prayers, with their questions, and with their presence.
thank you everyone for being here. Really appreciated your presence and questions and authenticity.
Khalil, any advertisements before we close?
No advertisements right now. We don't have the next webinar plan, but once we have the next thing scheduled, we'll be sure to advertise it through the diocese email list and our Facebook page. So make sure you like the Facebook page so you can stay up to date on any of our new events coming up.
Super. Father Joe, thank you for hosting us. Any commercials?
No commercials from this end. It's a pleasure to be with all of you. Stay well.
God is with us through his grace and love for mankind, always, now, and ever, unto the ages of ages. Amen.
Man, he's behind there. That's talk.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.